Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. It's lovely to be here with you. And my name is Catherine Tomlinson. And um, today's episode, we're going to be talking about clay and like picking clay. If you were just starting, from scratch, like here you go, make some pottery. We're going to be talking about like how to pick the clay to make your thing out of, because they're like they're sort of been thinking about this, and they're like maybe three things that I would consider if I was just like picking a clay from out of nowhere. Really. So, okay. The first thing to say is that I actually make my own clay. So I have a really specific recipe that I use, um, where I basically select ingredients that are like as local as possible to me, and also I've like purposefully um, got these ingredients because I know where they're from. I know they're from a single source. I know where they're mined, the region they're mined, and I know that that region has robust legislation to protect the people mining that material and also the environment as well. So if you were this is maybe I should say this at the end, I don't know, but if you were interested in like making your own clay and you're interested in like looking at the ingredients that I've selected to make my own clay, you can find the recipe in the book Eco-Friendly Pottery, which is available on the Oxford Clay website. And it's page 24. And basically, the recipe is actually for a paper clay slip, but you could use this recipe just to make your own clay. You just would leave out the sodium silicate, which is the thing that like makes the clay runny, makes it into a slip. So, or you could add it and then you could just like let it kind of set again. So that's what I do. I basically make a slip and then I use the scraps from when I slip cast to then wedge into clay again, like reclaim it into fresh clay. And then I use that for like throwing pots on the wheel and stuff. Because by that stage, the sodium silicate, the deflocculant in that clay has kind of like degraded. So I can just like use it as clay again. So yeah, so if you wanted to make your own clay, that's a great recipe. And the recipe originally came from this book, which is called The Essential Guide to Mold Making and Slip Casting by Andrew Martin, and it's an adapted recipe from that book. So at the back of this book, they've got like just Andrew Martin's just got like different recipes to make different slips, like stoneware slip. Yeah, so the clay that I make, the slip that I make, is actually a stoneware slip. Okay, so if you were going to go to the like pottery shop, the pottery supplier, and you were like going to pick a clay to make something out, to make your thing out of, these are the things that I would be thinking about. Okay, so um, the first thing to say is that you need to decide whether you want an earthenware or a stoneware clay. So this is a really the reason I put this like first in terms of like the first criteria for picking your clay is because this is like a really really important thing to get like not like right, but like if you're firing this clay to stoneware temperatures, you have to use a stoneware clay. So that's the kind of best way to remember it. If you're firing to stoneware, you need a stoneware clay because earthenware clays can't be fired to stoneware temperatures. They just can't withstand those high temperatures. And what happens to them is they start like bubbling and they can actually even melt. They can collapse, the shape can collapse because the ingredients in the earthenware clay will start to melt at those really high temperatures. So I've said this before on the podcast, but when I went to pottery evening classes, one of the teachers let me actually fire something which was earthenware, an earthenware clay. It was like a red earthenware clay, and they let me fire it up to stoneware temperatures, and which was really really kind of them, and it kind of like bubbled. That's how I kind of knew that it was beginning to start melting. So the actual bowl, rather than smooth, was all kind of all, I don't know, like knobbly sort of thing, because where the clay had started to kind of like melt. So that's what you need really. You need the right clay for the right temperature, and stoneware clay for stoneware firing. And if you're not sure like the difference between them, I've done an episode on that actually, the difference between stoneware and earthenware, which I'll link below so you can like listen to it. And basically it's just the temperature difference. That's the difference. So if you had like electric kiln or something, that goes up to stoneware temperatures, you can fire to stoneware or you can fire to earthenware because that's slightly lower temperature. Okay, so that's really important to pick the right clay for the right temperature. And just to say, like you can fire stoneware clay at earthenware temperatures. It's just it's really important, like not well, not to fire, but like if you're firing earthenware clay up to stoneware, it's a no go. Well, it's not really. It just kind of starts to melt basically. So, okay, so that's the first thing to consider what temperature you're firing at and whether you want earthenware or stoneware clay. And the next thing that like if I was starting from scratch, like what I would consider, putting aside all the environmental aspect that I described at the beginning, what I would consider is what I was making, right? So if I was like, so obviously in pottery there are so many different techniques, and essentially you want the right clay for the thing that you're making. And this sounds like this can sound a bit overwhelming, but it's really not. It's really comes down to like the strength of the clay that you want and then the kind of smoothness of it basically. So say if you're, for example, hand building something, you might be hand building like a big sculpture or something. It's would be a really good idea to use a clay which is like very strong and like really robust, so you can kind of build, that sculpture would be very strong in the way it kind of like, and you could add bits on, and so you don't want a very smooth kind of pliable clay, like, I don't know how the best way to describe it, like floppy. You want like a very strong clay, and there are some clays that are actually built for hand building things. So that could be a crank. Like the crank is a type of clay which is like very good for hand building. And these clays generally have sand or grog in them. So grog is like when clay has been fired up to bisqueware and then it's ground down and then it's added back into wet clay, and it just adds like a real strength to the clay. So those are really good for like hand building stuff. But obviously, if it's like got bits of like, sand or grit or grog in the clay, you don't necessarily want to be throwing pots with that clay on the wheel. So, and I have actually thrown pots before with crank, and it does really just hurt your hands. It's basically like sandpaper, like holding sandpaper, trying to like make a pot. Yeah, I remember I said like I was at an evening class, and like the teacher was like, I don't think you really want to be throwing with that clay. It was like crank, and I was like, no, it's gonna make a lovely pot. It's gonna be all like, thought it was gonna be all like rustic, and the way it looked, and yeah, it just really really hurt my hands, and it was also really really difficult to turn the pot afterwards. So yeah, a smooth clay, when I turned it upside down and did the foot the next week. So yeah, a smooth clay is much better for making pots on the wheel with. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. So that's the consideration there. It's like, do you want something that is like, yeah, very strong for hand building, or do you want something which is like smoother so you can throw pots with it? And the different clays will be sort of like different levels of kind of strength in terms of when you're actually throwing on the wheel. So some clays are very plastic, like a kind of porcelain, very very smooth, and they can't be worked very much. Like when you're making a pot, they don't have much strength to them when you're actually trying to create your pot. They can be very easily like overworked, and then they're kind of like the pot shape will collapse. Or they can be a bit stronger, like they might have, I don't know, something added to make it kind of like just hold its shape better when you're making that pot on the wheel. So like different pottery suppliers, like who create clay, they will be able to like tell you, or like the supplier has different clays that they sell, and like each one will be for a specific use, and there might be some that are like, oh, this is for throwing clay. So yeah, they'll be really good in a really good position to like advise you on that. Um, okay, and then the third thing I thought of was just the color of the clay. So this could be in a consideration if you were, say, for example, you wanted a very specific aesthetic with the pot you were making. Like, say, for example, I don't know, you had like a red clay, and then you wanted to inlay another clay, or you wanted to do a certain design that was like a bright color or something, and you wanted it to show up really well. Then you could do, you could get like a light colored clay. And so different clays have different levels of sort of naturally occurring iron in, and ones that have lots of iron can be quite sort of like red, towards the red end of the scale, and then ones with less iron in are like more kind of like white clays. And you can get earthenware and stoneware clays, like a big variation of colors. So I used to think actually that earthenware clay was always red, and that's just that's just because at my pottery evening class, like for years I went there, and they only had red earthenware clay, and now I realize that that is because they wanted to really clearly differentiate it. Okay, this is earthenware, and then they had a white clay as the stoneware, and that's how they could tell apart, because they were doing firings for like both types, and like all sorts of people, like coming in making stuff, loads of different things, and the crank as well, like that clay, and hand building stuff and throwing pots on the wheel. And it was a really good way for them to sort out, okay, we know this is earthenware because it's red. So, but you can get white earthenware clay as well. So yeah, there's a big variation in different colors of clay. And um, when I went to a pottery supplier recently, actually they had like all the different types of clay that they sold, like sort of commercial bagged clay, which they usually come in packs of like 12.5 kilograms in the UK. And they had like a little tester tile of each one, like fired. Um, so you could see the color of it basically when it's fired, because a lot of clay just kind of looks gray, like in the bag it's like gray. So yeah, it was really cool to see like all the different ones and like exactly what they looked like when they were fired. Yeah, so those are things I would consider. So yeah, setting aside, the fact that I make my own clay and that I've like selected those ingredients. Like if you wanted to know the ingredients in clay, you could always ask a pottery supplier. They might know. You could ask the manufacturer. They might know too. But also, if you wanted to make your own clay, there is a recipe in eco-friendly pottery. And like I said, I selected those ingredients to be like as sort of local to me as possible, like in the UK. But so some of these ingredients, for example, China clay is in the clay I make, and also ball clays as well. And in the UK, we've got some ball clays which are like from Southwest England. Same with the China clay, which is like from Cornwall, Groll egg China clay. So you might have like ball clays and other ingredients that are like closer to you, which you could add to your own clay. If you wanted to make your own clay, you're thinking, oh, that sounds good, and like I want to make my own clay. Yeah, like I said, the recipe is in eco-friendly pottery, if you want to have a look at it. Yeah. Oh, well, thanks so much for joining me today. It was really nice to talk you through like the different things I would think about when if I was picking a clay from nowhere. Yeah. So just to go over that again, is it earthenware or stoneware? That's the first thing I'd think about. The next thing would be like what I'm actually making, and like whether the clay is appropriate, like for what I'm making. I don't want too much grit if I'm throwing a pot on the wheel. Yeah, in my clay. And then the next thing would be just like the color of it, like, and is it going to work with like the glaze I want to use, or the design I want to do, or the specific aesthetic I want for my pottery. Yeah, so those are the things I would consider. So oh yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. It's been really nice to talk to you about different types of clay, and like picking your clay, and wishing you very, very happy potting until the next episode. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you then. Okay, goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.